I join Wes in welcoming you tonight, and indeed we are studying in the book of Judges, chapter 20. Last week we were in chapter 19, and I couldn't tell you how many folks after that study said something along the lines of, I enjoyed the class, but I didn't enjoy that class. Judges chapter 19 is indeed one of the most depressing scenes of Scripture in terms of the condition of a society. Judges chapter 20 really doesn't get much better, except in that what we see taking place in chapter 20, there's a sense in which we're a bit more desensitized to the nature of what's going to be taking place. These chapters aren't intended to be easy to swallow. These chapters are intended to demonstrate exactly the nature of a world where God's not the king, the nature of a society where God is not allowed to reign. That's exactly what's taking place in Israel at this time. There's no king in Israel. Everyone's doing what's right in his own eyes. Now, we've discussed how the book of Judges is indeed a book demonstrating the deterioration of a nation. They begin with disobedience, chapters 1 and 2. We see deterioration, chapters 3 through 16, chapters 17 through 21, desolation. We pick up in chapter 20, remembering what we viewed last week, because we must of necessity pick up where we left. Judges chapter, let's see if we can get that to move. Judges 19, we labeled it homicide. Now these three chapters combined, we're looking at homemade righteousness, whereas chapters 17 and 18 were homemade religion. This is homemade righteousness. When folks are really doing what they claim is right in terms of morality, not just religion, but now it's morality and justice. When we looked at chapter 19, again, we labeled it homicide. It began with infidelity, adultery. And then we see a demonstration of apathy, people that just don't care for other folks. They'll leave them in the street. It proceeds to pride, willing to do whatever they want to do in order to demonstrate their superiority and impose their will on someone else. The demand of the men was Gibeah was, old man, send out your guest. We plan on knowing him. And it wasn't a matter of a simple handshake and get to know your name. Their pride. This was a city in the land of Israel that may as well have been Sodom. We move forward. Incidentally, pride was the sin of Sodom as well, according to Ezekiel 16:49. Moving forward, instead of getting a hold of the male visitor, they get a hold of his concubine and abuse her all the night, as it's described in chapter 19. In the morning, she's deceased. Her uncaring husband opens the door, and there she's laying, and he says, get up, let's get going. Well, she has no life left in her. So he takes her remains back home, separates her body into pieces, and mails a piece to each of the tribes of Israel, demonstrating and declaring to them, picking up at verse 30 of chapter 29, rather, of chapter 19. When he was coming to his house, he took a knife, laid hold on his concubine, divided her with her bones into 12 pieces, and sent her into all the coast of Israel. And it was so that all that saw it and said, there was no such deed done, nor seen from the day that the children of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt unto this day. They've looked at this situation and they say, this is as bad as it gets. Our society has deteriorated to this point. Take a look at it, consider it, speak your minds. What do we do? And now that brings us to chapter 20. We're going to proceed from homicide to genocide. And by the time it's all said and done, we're finished with chapter 21, we'll see another idea. But this chapter of genocide, now it's going to begin with the concept of justice. But as the congregation endeavors to exercise justice, there's going to be a group that says, no, these people look like us, talk like us, they're identified with us, we're going to protect them, we don't care if they're guilty. And it's going to proceed from protecting guilty lives to causing innocent deaths. Let's go ahead and pick up again, and by the time we're finished with chapter 20, you're going into 21, we'll have seen homicide, genocide, and then they're going to be going around stealing brides, again, as an act of justice and balance. So essentially, this all begins with rape and murder, and it's going to end with murder and rape. That's how bad their society is. Chapter 20. Again, we've labeled this genocide. Well, let's look at the first 11 verses and ask this question. Do we seek God's justice or do we ignore it? That's what they're seeming to do as they gather together. Judges 20, picking up at verse 1. All the children of Israel went out, and the congregation was gathered together as one man. That statement occurs 3 times in this chapter. It's in verse 1, it's in verse 8, and it's in verse 11. They're acting as one man. They are in unison, and frankly, that's quite something given this dysfunctional family. There's a reason why, as we studied through the book of Judges, so often we see one section of Israel having to deal with an oppression because the other ones just don't care about what they're facing. They had become isolationist even in regard to one another, and they were not operating in unison as a nation. But here, this atrocity has caused all of the nation to come together as one man. Verse 1, the end of the verse. They've gathered from Dan even to Beersheba with the land of Gilead unto the Lord in Mizpah. Now from Dan, that's as far north in Israel as you can go. We talked about those folks from Dan that went and took the city of Laish back in chapters 17 and 18. That would be Dan. Beersheba is the southernmost major city in the tribe of Judah. So from Dan to Beersheba would be like us saying from New York to L.A. in the U.S. or coast to coast. So from Dan to Beersheba and the land of Gilead, in other words, from north to south and all those tribes over on the east across Jordan, they've gathered together for this as well. Why have they gathered together? Let's notice. First, they've gathered together as one man. They've gathered together as one before God. They're involving God in this. They are not simply upset at the atrocity and heinousness of the crime, but they are coming before God in order to discuss these things. Now, we'll discuss momentarily, the tabernacle of the Lord was not located at the place where they gathered, nor was the ark stationed there. But they are gathered together as a congregation at this location, and the significance of the location is worth noticing. They've gathered together as one before God in Mizpah. Now, Mizpah is located in Benjamin. So all the nation has come together and gathered together at a set location within the boundaries of the tribe where this atrocity took place. You'll remember Gibeah, located just in the southeast of Benjamin. And then the ark, the tabernacle, was kept at Shiloh, north of Benjamin, within the tribe of Ephraim at the time. They gathered together at Mizpah, a reasonable meeting point. They are having this court hearing in the jurisdiction where the crime took place. They're not gathering together over in Gilead and saying, what are we going to do about those Benjamites over on the west? They're not gathering together in Judah and finding a verdict of guilty and then saying, let's go whoop them. No, they are gathering together in Benjamin. They've gathered together as one before God. They've gathered together as one before God in Mizpah of Benjamin. And notice moving forward from verse 1, the chief of all the people, even all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 footmen that drew sword. They have leaders, they have soldiers. They've gathered together as the assembly, the congregation of God, except, now the children of Benjamin heard that the children of Israel were gone up to Mizpah. You know what that means. Hey, were you at so-and-so's house the other night? No, I heard they were getting together, but. Hey, have you watched this new show? Well, I've heard about it, but. Hey, have you tried this new meal? Well, I've heard about it. The tribe of Benjamin heard they were there, but they didn't go. An atrocity has taken place within their borders that involves the most heinous nature of crimes that our minds can fathom. And instead of Benjamin being first on the list to say, we have an atrocity in our midst, this court convenes within their territory. And nary a hair of a Benjamite's head can be seen. They gathered together as one before God in Mizpah of Benjamin, all except Benjamin. Why? Why? I believe we can see that as we move forward. Picking up in verse 3, then said the children of Israel, tell us, how was this wickedness? Tell us how this happened. What has taken place here? Picking up at verse 4, the Levite, the husband of the woman that was slain, answered and said, he describes the events, very briefly as a matter of fact. He says, I came into Gibeah that belongeth to Benjamin, I and my concubine, to lodge. And the men of Gibeah rose against me, and beset the house round about upon me by night, and thought to have slain me. He's not wrong. They said nothing about, hey, send out your guests so we can commit murder. No, they said, send out your guests so that we can know him. But their plans were to abuse this Levite all the night. And we have to ask, did they know by looking at him, or perhaps by having heard him speak to his concubine on the street, did they identify him as a Levite? And was that part of their desire? To exercise their profane, vulgar, and corrupt whims on someone that was supposed to be of the holy tribe? Of perhaps even connected to the priesthood? Not all Levites were priests. But here's one that he works with at the tabernacle of God. Watch what we'll do to him. Also, when he says the men of Gibeah rose against me, the word translated men is not the typical word translated men in the Old Testament that just means male or man. This is the word that carries the idea of masters and leaders. It's the leaders of the city that enacted this atrocity, which requires us to drop a tent peg for a moment. Go back into chapter 19. I know few of us want to look at chapter 19 of Judges, but locate verse 22 and just notice the description given of the ones who came knocking on the elderly gentleman's door. Judges 19, verse 22, now as they were making their hearts merry, this is the Levite, his wife, and their host, behold, the men of the city, don't miss this part, certain sons of Belial. Now this can be translated variously. Some would translate it as base men. Others translate it as worthless men. According to Judges 19:22, the ones that came knocking on the door were sons of Belial. They were base and worthless men. According to Judges 20, verse 5, they were leaders of the city. Starting to hit home, isn't it? You ever look at our modern politicians and realize how depraved they are? No, we don't have to name a party. Just start looking at some of the policies that are put forward or some of the statements that we hear. The basest among us are some of the leaders. And the leaders among us are some of the basest. You ever stop and look around and wonder how close we are to living in a place like Sodom or Gibeah? Well, when the leaders are of this nature, it gives you an idea. Now bring it down to the local level. How often is it the case that you've got a town where maybe there are a few righteous folks there, but they're afraid to stand up and say much because of the power exercised or the threat presented by the malicious, by the vulgar. We've mentioned that the book of Judges is the wild, wild west. Well, this is something of a tombstone. This is a situation where those that are in control and the leaders are corrupt, wicked. So, we come back to Judges 20, picking up at verse 5. The men, the leaders of Gibeah. Oh, by the way, when the leaders are acting like that, that's a reflection on more than just the leaders. That's a reflection on either the morality of the public or the cowardice of the public. One of the two. Because either the public has the leaders they want or they lack the spine to get rid of the ones they don't need. So, picking up at verse 5, these men of Gibeah rose against me, he said, and beset the house round about upon me by night, thought to have slain me, and my concubine they have forced, and she is dead. Brief summary of a horrific event. Verse 6, he says, I took my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel. I sent her and the evidence of what they did to her to all my brethren. For they have committed lewdness and folly in Israel. Now, this is a tribunal. This is a gathering of justice and judgment. The princes, the chiefs of the tribes are there. There are multiple judges of regions represented here. Benjamin just doesn't show up, which makes us wonder how corrupt Benjamin's justice system was within their own tribe. Now, when the rest of the tribes acknowledge how horrific this event is, and they will, we'll get an idea of just what their reaction is. But notice the words that are used here. The Levite says they've committed lewdness. Now, every time this word is used previously, Leviticus 18:17, Leviticus 19:29, Leviticus 20, verse 14, each of those passages refers to some kind of a sexual sin. So not just lewdness in terms of immorality or wickedness. He is charging them not just with murder, but with the imposing, lewd nature of the crime. Lewdness, and he says, they have committed folly in Israel. The first time we hear of folly being committed in Israel, all the way back in Genesis 34:7, when Dinah's brothers say that Shechem has wrought folly in Israel by what he's done with Dinah. That occasion where their little sister had been with, seems to have been forcibly, we can't be 100% certain, had been with Shechem. Sexual sin. Or we move forward in Scripture. We look at Deuteronomy 22:21. Again, the reference there, wrought folly in Israel, is to sexual sin. Now, there's an occasion where this does not refer specifically to sexual sin, although it could in some way be connected. But when Achan, Joshua 7, verse 15, had taken of that accursed thing, it is said that the one that did this had wrought folly in Israel. Now, while this cannot be directly connected to a sexual sin unless some of the items taken were of that nature, it can be said that the action of the one who took the accursed thing and his actions resulted in the death of about 36 of his brethren in the next battle. This folly is either connected to sexual sin or death. So the charge levied against these Gibeonites is sexual sin and death. Sadistic crimes. Moving forward, notice the consequences. They are severe. Verse 7, he says, you are all the children of Israel. Give here your advice and counsel. What do you think needs to be done? Oh, by the way, that idea of folly and vile, their lewdness. If we go back into Judges 19 and see what the elderly man said, do not such a vile thing. Work not such folly. He used the same two words in Judges 19, 23, and 24, declaring to them before they ever did this that these were sins of a particularly heinous nature. Now we move forward. Verse 8. All the people arose as one man. Here it is again, they're acting in unison. They arose as one man, saying, we will not any of us go to his tent, neither will we any of us turn into his house. But now this shall be the thing which we will do to Gibeah. We will go up by lot against it. Now the description given here is not just we're going to oppose Gibeah. We begin with the declaration, we're not going home until... We're not going home until what? We're not going home until we have, the King James has gone up by lot. Another way of translating this, because you'll notice that the words we will go up are in italics in verse 9, which means it's been supplied by the translators. The idea is the attack is going to be according to a lot. Now, we need to look through Scripture a bit to figure out exactly what this means, but if we'll bounce back to Joshua for just a moment. Joshua 23, verse 4. When the land had been assigned, the inheritance given, but there were still some isolated indigenous people to drive out of the land, Joshua 23, 4, Joshua told the people, behold, I have divided unto you by lot these nations that remain, to be an inheritance for your tribes. The ones that remain, not just the land, but the nations that remain. And their job with these nations was to go in and drive them out. I've given it to you by lot. The children of Israel say concerning Gibeah, we're going to go up against them by lot. We're going to treat them like we treated the inhabitants of the land, or frankly, like they were supposed to have treated the inhabitants of the land. You remember they got sissified by the end of Judges chapter 1 and didn't drive out all they were supposed to do. But no, now they're big and brave. They have 400,000 gathered together with them, and they're going to go up against this one city of Gibeah, which frankly deserves justice. And they're going to do unto them as they should have done unto the Canaanites. I believe we can all agree with the fervor and the desire to have justice rendered upon an entire city that has committed such an atrocity. But justice must always be fair and unbalanced. Fair and balanced, rather. Instead of only exercised when it's convenient and it feels safe for me. The people of Israel already have a problem in the way they're executing justice. Moving forward, verse 10. They say, we will take 10 men of 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 out of 1,000, and 1,000 out of 10,000. In other words, we're going to take 10% of the entirety. 10% of 10, 10% of 100, 10% of 10,000, to fetch victuals for the people, that they may do when they come to Gibeah of Benjamin according to all the folly that they have wrought in Israel. We are going to war. We are taking all of the men that are gathered here, 400,000, and we're going to put 10% of them to work as cookies. They're going to be the mess hall. They're going to be the ones that will gather provision. We're serious about this, and we want to make sure that we have the supplies we need. Verse 11. So all the men of Israel were gathered together against the city, knit together as one man. Now, the verses that follow actually describe what happens before they're gathered against the city. Skip ahead for just a moment to verse 19. Actually, verses 18 and 19. The children of Israel arose, went up to the house of God, asked counsel of God, and said, which of us shall go up first to the battle against the children of Benjamin? The Lord said, Judah shall go up first. And then the children of Israel rose up in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. They'd not gathered at Gibeah yet. They've made the decision back in verse 11. They're gathered together in intent, And perhaps chapter 11 describes the ultimate outcome of the following verses as they prepare. But there's some things that happen before they're actually encamped and besieging this city. One of those is they ask God who should go up first. And the reason we need to look at that here is this. Go back to Judges chapter 1. Remember how we noted they said, we're going to go up by lot, or by lot against them. This was the same way they were to go against the Canaanites. And when they went up against the Canaanites by lot, notice what they asked God. Judges 1:1, after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall go up for us against the Canaanites first, to fight against them? Who should go fight first? That's what they asked God here concerning Gibeah. God said, Judges 1:2, the Lord said, Judah shall go up. That's exactly what he's going to say in Judges chapter 20. They are treating Gibeah like a city whose residents aren't even their brethren. Keep that in mind as we now move back to verse 12 and move forward. Because they are speaking of Gibeah as though they have no connection, no relation, as though they're not their brethren. Verse 12, the tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribes of Benjamin, saying, what wickedness is this that's done among you? They have let Benjamin know, here's what we're planning on doing. Now, it's a sadistic crime. There are severe consequences. They are going to be punished, and rightly punished. Deuteronomy 13, picking up at verse 12. Moses had told the people, when you find out about a city that has turned away from God and gone after other gods, Deuteronomy 13:12, if you hear say in one of thy cities, which the Lord thy God has given you to dwell there, certain men, the children of Belial, does that sound familiar? Certain worthless men are gone out from among you and have withdrawn the inhabitants of their city, saying, go, let's serve other gods, which you've not known. Now, we might pause here and say, wait a minute, it wasn't idolatry that was being committed in Gibeah. Yes, it was. You don't act like that with any kind of connection to the God of Israel. As we move forward in chapter 20, we're going to read about a place called Baal Tamar. Baal Tamar. A high place near Gibeah named after a false god. Who do you think they're worshiping there at Gibeah? What do you think their mentality there is? They are committing these atrocities because they've given up on God and their religion. Now, what was to be done to such nations, still in Deuteronomy 13, or to such cities? The first point made was verse 14, thou shalt inquire and search and ask diligently if it be the truth. You go and you check and you find out and you investigate if this is true. And if it is, verse 15, thou shalt surely smite the inhabitants of the city with the edge of the sword, destroying it utterly. That's what Israel's doing. Gibeah is guilty of this very nature of sin, and they are about to smite them utterly. So we come back to Judges chapter 20. Picking up at what we just noted in verse 12. What they're doing is scriptural. Not only based on Deuteronomy 13, but also Numbers 35, verse 33. God had said, blood defiles the land, and it cannot be cleansed but by the blood of him that shed it. In other words, when such atrocities took place, that there was to be blood shed. Had been blood shed in Gibeah of the most atrocious sort. Deuteronomy 22, beginning in verse 22, there are a list of, again, sexual sins. And with each of these, the point is made, that one was to be put to death for this so that they could put away evil from Israel. Again, all of those principles and precepts from what has already been taught, Deuteronomy 13, Deuteronomy 22, Numbers 35, all of those are coming together in what the nation seems to be about to do to Gibeah. If I'm reading through Judges 20 and I've never read it before, I'm thinking, hey, it looks like Looks like the nation has some semblance of, but let's keep reading before we make too many assumptions. Do we seek God's justice, or like Benjamin, do we ignore it? Benjamin didn't care about it at all. Sent no judges, no representatives. Hey, leave us alone. There in our land, go back to your own house. Picking up at verse 12. The tribes sent men throughout all the tribes, that is all the family of Benjamin, saying, what wickedness is this that's done among you? What's taking place among you? Now that's more investigation. That's actually sending others in to say, hey, here's what's happened among you. Do you know how your society has deteriorated? Some have supposed that this may have been a commonplace mentality in Benjamin, and maybe that's why Benjamin wouldn't defend Gibeah, because it wasn't the only city in Benjamin that acted like this. Perhaps. Or maybe there's more to it than that. Let's pick up at verse 13. The people of Israel say to those of Benjamin, deliver us the men, the children of Belial, which are in Gibeah. Deliver us the culprits. Deliver the ones that have done this. Deliver this city, because this is a city-wide, municipal-wide crime. The city is to pay. But instead of delivering the guilty, Benjamin first, end of verse 13, instead of having them put to death and putting away the evil from Israel, the children of Benjamin would not hearken to the voice of their brethren, the children of Israel. They simply disregarded their brethren. They wouldn't listen. I don't have to listen to you. You're not the boss of me. Who made you king? Can't you just hear them? You know, those same 8-year-old replies that we get from 48-year-olds still today. The immaturity and rejection of authority. Rather than deliver the culprits, the guilty, they disregarded their brethren. Those that, at least from what we can see so far, appear to be pursuing justice. And perhaps had Benjamin done what they should have done, it would have stopped at an equitable justice. But Benjamin not only disregarded their brethren, verse 14, the children of Benjamin gathered themselves together out of the cities unto Gibeah to go out to battle against the children of Israel. They didn't only ignore them, they said, you can't push us around. They puffed out their chest, they lifted up their fists, and they said, come get some. They went out to fight. You have a tribe of Israel that has a city among them that is guilty of such hoodlum behavior as would make angels weep. And their kinsmen are saying, we're going to defend you, instead of standing on a principle of law, instead of adhering to the precepts of righteousness. We're going to defend blood rather than stand with God. So instead of delivering the guilty, they disregarded their brethren and they defended their kinsmen, the ones that are closest to them. Christians, it doesn't matter what our accents are. It does not matter what our economic status may be. And it matters not 1 cent what my complexion may be. When I put externals over eternals, when I prioritize tones over righteousness, when I'm willing to identify with someone who bears similar characteristics on the outside, instead of someone who lives by the same principles throughout, I've just declared to God, I don't need your authority. What's most important to me is protecting those that remind me of me, instead of letting what's most important to me being standing with those that are following God. That's where the tribe of Benjamin is right now. Not much has changed in the world, has it? Let's move forward. They defended their kinsmen. Their kinsmen have committed crimes. Leave them alone. You didn't grow up where they did. You don't know what they've been through. They committed a crime. It doesn't matter where they grew up or what they've been through. They raped a woman to death, and they wanted to do it to her husband. The people of Benjamin? No, we'll fight you. So they organize their protest. They go out with their swords. And verse 15, the children of Benjamin were numbered at that time out of the cities 26,000 men that drew swords, not counting besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, which were numbered 700 chosen men. That puts the men of Gibeah at 26,700, or the fighters of Benjamin at 26,700. That puts the fighters of Israel at 400,000. Of course, 40,000 of them are cooking dinner, but 400,000 soldiers. Now, verse 16. Among all this people there were 700 chosen men left-handed. Everyone could sling stones at a hair-breadth and not miss. The term left-handed, the literal meaning of the Hebrew word is lame in the right hand, which means that they were prominent with their left. And they are so dexterous with their left hand that they can, as it's described here, sling stones at a hair's breadth. I can't even see a hair's breadth, let alone hit it. But that's how accurate they are. Verse 17. And the men of Israel, besides Benjamin, were numbered 400,000 men that drew sword. All these were men of war. Now, two questions so far that we can ask of them and we can apply to ourselves. Do we seek God's justice or do we ignore it like Benjamin did? Do we seek God's justice or do we oppose it? Instead of delivering the guilty, do we disregard God's standards? Instead of delivering the guilty, do we defend those that remind me of me? Now let's move forward, picking up at verse 18. Do we seek God's justice or, and this time, while Benjamin still has plenty of filth on their record, Benjamin's not the only one that's making mistakes here. Picking up at verse 18, do we seek God's justice or self-promotion? The children of Israel rose and went up to the house of God. The word translated house of God is the word Bethel. In fact, they went to Bethel, the place where Jacob had seen that ladder, a staircase ascending into heaven back in Genesis 28. They came to Bethel, house of God, and asked counsel of God and said, which of us shall go up first to battle against the children of Benjamin? Now, the reason they've gone to Bethel is because the ark of God had been brought to Bethel, according to verse 27. So they've gone to Bethel. Let's go ahead and put that on a map and see where that is. They had gathered at Mizpah, which was inside Benjamin. Bethel is right on the border between Benjamin and Ephraim. And the ark, which would have been coming from Shiloh, would have found quite the safe place to stop, a good middle ground right there at Bethel. So they gather together to Bethel, and they inquire of the Lord, shall we go up? No. Is this the right thing? No. They seem to be rather confident that they're doing what they should do. And in terms of ultimate desire for executing judgment, they are. But apparently something's wrong with their attitude. Let's read the next several verses and notice how these events play out. They go up to the house of God and they ask counsel, and what they say is, which of us shall go up first to the battle against the children of Benjamin? Remember that question from Judges chapter 1? They're treating the children of Benjamin. Now it's not just Gibeah. Now it's the children of Benjamin. They're inquiring about them as though they're not family anymore. They're about to treat the entire tribe as though they're not a tribe. They've taken their avidness too far. Benjamin's in the wrong, absolutely. But they're not the Canaanites. Now the men of Gibeah, another story. But now they're looking at a tribe as though they're not God's people at all. God answers and says, Judah shall go up first. We need to understand something. When it comes to our prayers, first, God always answers. Sometimes He says yes, sometimes He says no, sometimes He says wait, but He always answers. Just because I get what I want just because I don't get what I want doesn't mean He didn't answer it. But moreover, sometimes just because I get what I want doesn't mean that He answered with what I really needed. Perhaps there's a challenge involved in it. You ever known of anyone that ever said, oh, go ahead, do what you want to do? Gotta wonder if that's the sense here. They come to God, which of us shall go up first against the children of Benjamin? Judah. Judah will go first. Judah's the one that's supposed to take the lead. So, verse 19, the children of Israel rose up in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. The men of Israel went out to battle against Benjamin, 400,000 to 26,700. The men of Israel put themselves in array to fight against them at Gibeah. Here they are, all nice and tidy, looking like the British during the Revolutionary War in their lines and marching. And the men of Gibeah conduct a slaughter. Verse 21, whereas the people of Israel were set in array, the children of Benjamin simply came forth out of Gibeah and destroyed down to the ground the Israelites that day, 22,000. The men of Benjamin slew almost as many of their brethren from Israel as there were fighters of Benjamin. There are 26,700 men of Benjamin that are there to fight. 22,000 Israelites die that day. No way around it. That's a slaughter. It's not going to be the last one. Israel inquired of God. The first time it was only with war in mind. Which shall go up first? They lost that battle. God sent them in the battle because that's where they wanted to go. They lost it. So here they come again. Verse 22. The people of the men of Israel encouraged themselves. Literally, they strengthened themselves. Oh, we got this, we're all right. No, we're good, we're men, we can do this. We're Israel, come, let's go. They strengthened themselves, encouraged themselves, gave themselves a pep rally, and set their battle in array in the place where they put themselves in array the first time, the first day. They've already decided we're going to fight again. Come on, we can do this. And then verse 23, then the children of Israel went up and wept before the Lord God. Once again, God's an afterthought. They wept before the Lord until even and asked counsel of the Lord, saying, shall I go up to battle again against the children of Benjamin, my brother? The Lord said, go up against him. Now, they've already set it in array. They've got their minds made up. And when it says the next day, it's not necessarily the next day on the calendar, but the next day that battle took place. Because they're going to be traveling to Bethel, where the ark is. There's going to be a couple of days' travel involved here. They go out to fight again. Picking up at verse 24. The children of Israel came near against the children of Benjamin the second day. God said, go fight. We've got this, right? And Benjamin went forth against them out of Gibeah the second day and destroyed down to the ground of the children of Israel again 18,000 men. All these drew the sword. 18,000 talk in a pep rally. They don't say, hey, we've got this. No, now, picking up at verse 26, then all the children of Israel and all the people went up and came unto the house of God and wept and sat there before the Lord and fasted that day until even and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. Burnt offering is to make an atonement. Peace offering involves acknowledging God for who He is, giving thanks to God, or voluntary vows unto God. We look at the purposes of these offerings, and so far they've not come to God and said, we want to make sure that we're one with you. They've not come to God and said, thank you for who you are. No, they've just come to God and said, hey, General, which way shall we go? Admiral, do we fight again? They've not treated God like God. They've treated God like the genie to tell them what to do. So God's let them taste the fruits of their mentalities. They inquired of God first with only war in mind. That wasn't the right mindset. Next, they had tears, but they weren't the right kind of tears. But now they come to God with true penitence. There's a lot wrong in Israel, and it's not just in Benjamin. The nation comes to God, and now they are crying, fasting until even, offering sacrifices. They inquired of the Lord, verse 27, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days, and Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, stood before it in those days. Phinehas, serving as the high priest. We've discussed him already. They say, shall I yet go again out to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother, or shall I cease? Ooh. Now it's not just shall I fight against the children of Benjamin, but the children of Benjamin, my brother. It sounds like there's some change. It sounds like, at least cognitively, mentally, intellectually, they've come to the point of saying, hey, we need to be looking at Benjamin the right way. Do I go up again against Benjamin, my brother, or shall I cease? The Lord God said, go up, for tomorrow I'll deliver them into thine hand. If ever they were in a mentality to administer the proper amount of justice and the proper amount of mercy, it should have been on this occasion. They should have seen what all was at stake, how much they've already lost, and been able to engage in this battle with the kind of fervor they needed to execute justice, at the same time with the kind of restraint needed that once justice was executed, it would not become mayhem. They failed. They were seeking self-promotion. Look at us, how just we are. We've not done what Gibeah did. Let's go whoop them. Do we seek God's justice, or do we ignore it? Do we seek God's justice, or do we oppose it? Do we seek God's justice or self-promotion? Look at me and how good I am. Verse 29. Do we seek God's justice? Or in that screen should say, do we seek vengeance? Because that's exactly what they're about to seek. Picking up at verse 29. Israel set liers in wait round about Gibeah. The children of Israel went up against the children of Benjamin on the third day, put themselves in array against Gibeah as at other times, the third day of battle. Now they've put themselves in array. They look like they're going to be fighting the same way. And you know the folks of Gibeah are saying, well, there they are, lined up as targets. Hey, you 700 sharpshooters with your slingshots, have some fun. Verse 31, when the children of Benjamin went out against the people and were drawn away from the city, and they began to smite the people and kill as at other times, because Benjamin hasn't changed yet. They are of a mentality that is absolutely ungodly. They're smiting their brethren as at other times in the highways, of which one goes up to the house of God. They're slaughtering their brethren on the way to Bethel. They're slaughtering their brethren. You have to wonder if that might actually mean on the way toward the tabernacle. Killing their own kinsmen on the way to the house of their God. And the other to Gibeah in the field, about 30 men. So now here 30 more Israelites have died. Israel's battle plan starts with strategy. They give ground, and as they give ground, they end up giving some lives. But, picking up at verse 32, the children of Benjamin said, hey, now they're smitten down before us, as at the first. But the children of Israel had said, let us flee, and draw them from the city unto the highways. Remember verse 29, they've set liers in wait. They've set up an ambush around the city. Now they're saying, let's flee, let's draw them out. We'll be bait. Dangle me like a carrot. Now they turn and go. Verse 33, all the men of Israel rose up out of their place. These are the liers in wait. and put themselves in array at Baal Tamar, and the liers in wait of Israel came forth out of their places, even out of the meadows of Gibeah. Now those that were hiding have come out of hiding. The ambush is being executed, and they are going to advance with aggression. Picking up at verse 34, there came out against Gibeah 10,000 chosen men out of all Israel. Now most of the Benjamites have exited Gibeah, and they're in the battle. What's left in Gibeah is going to be far outnumbered by the 10,000 that are attacking the city. They came against Gibeah, 10,000 men, and the battle was sore, but they, Gibeah and Benjamin, knew not that evil was near them. Verse 35, and the Lord smote Benjamin before Israel. In other words, God gave Israel victory. They had it in their hands. And the children of Israel destroyed of the Benjamites that day 25,100. All these drew the sword, 25,100. They started with 26,700, which means that just with those two numbers, there's only 1,600 left. But if we skip ahead, notice verse 47. 600 men, this is the 600 survivors. 600 men turned and fled in the wilderness to the rock of Ramon. By the time it's all said and done, there are only going to be 600 survivors. Now, wait a minute. 26,700 minus 25,100, that gives me 1,600, not 600. That's right. Because apparently the Benjamites lost 1,000 on those previous 2 days' worth of battles. We get an idea of the magnitude of death. 40,030 for Israel. 26,100 for Benjamin. Picking up at verse 36. Yes, the fight advances with absolute aggression. The children of Benjamin saw they were smitten. This is giving more details about what leads up to the 25,100 being killed. They saw that they were smitten. The men of Israel gave place to the Benjamites. They gave them that cushion because they trusted unto the liers in wait, which they had set beside Gibeah. Verse 37, the liers in wait hasted. They rushed upon Gibeah. The liers in wait drew themselves along and smote all the city with the edge of the sword. They spared not a soul. It's a slaughter. It's a slaughter in Gibeah, the city that deserved it. Based on Deuteronomy 13, 12 through 17, this city deserved it. Now there was appointed a sign between the men of Israel and the liers in wait, that they should make a great flame, and the smoke rose up out of the city. So now the city's burning. That's the sign. Hey, when we've taken Gibeah, we'll send you a smoke signal. Verse 39. And when the men of Israel retired in the battle, in other words, they looked like they were retreating from Benjamin, Benjamin began to smite and kill of the men of Israel about 30 persons, as is already related. For they said, surely they're smitten down before us, as in the first battle. But when the flame began to arise up out of the city with a pillar of smoke. Now we're getting more details about how this battle falls out. The Benjamites look behind them, and behold, the city's all aflame. The flames ascend up to heaven. The men of Israel turned around and they say, yeah, we've got you now. They turned again. The men of Benjamin were amazed. They saw that evil was come upon them. Now they know it. Now they realize they're in trouble. And they turned their backs before the men of Israel unto the way of the wilderness, and they tried to run, but the battle overtook them. And them which came out of the cities they destroyed in the midst of them. Like ants fleeing an anthill, Israel stomping anyone they can find. Verse 43, thus they enclosed the Benjamites round about, and chased them, and trode them down with ease over against Gibeah toward the sun rising. Trode them down with ease. It's a slaughter. Gibeah deserve it? Yes. Benjamin deserved to be punished? Yes. This was war. Benjamin had voluntarily fought. But notice the way that this continues to progress. Verse 44, there fell of Benjamin 18,000. All these were men of valor. Now these numbers are estimates. We say that because the exact number of fallen is given to us already back in verse 35. But here, 18,000 in the main battle. Verse 45, as they turned and fled toward the wilderness unto the rock of Ramon, they gleaned of them in the highways 5,000 men. 5,000 as they're fleeing. And they pursued hard after them to DeGaulle and slew 2,000 more of them there. So you've got 18,000, 5,000, 2,000. You add those numbers together, that's 25,000. Wait a minute. Back in verse 35, it says 25,100. Yeah. How many people died on 9/11? 3,000, right? Actually, 2,996. We rounded to 3,000. How many died at Pearl Harbor? About 2,500 is what we say. 2,405, if I remember the number correctly. But we round the number. If we round numbers of casualties in events such as that in our day, can these round casualties when they've already given an exact number already? So, picking up at verse 46, so that all which fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000. Again, an estimated number. The actual count is in verse 35. 25,000 men that drew sword. All these were men of valor. But 600 turned and fled to the wilderness unto the rock Ramon, and abode in the rock Ramon for 4 months. Now, we'll need to remember this, because when next we meet, these are the survivors. And these are the only survivors because of what happens in verse 48. This battle plan started with a strategy. It advanced with aggression, but here's the worst travesty. Verse 48, the men of Israel turned again upon the children of Benjamin. They fought the soldiers, they've chased them, they've pursued them, they have ransacked Gibeah, and now they turn on the children of Benjamin and smote them with the edge of the sword, as well the men of every city, the ones that weren't even in the fight, as well the men as the beast, and all that came to hand, everyone they found, men, women, children, they set on fire all the cities that they came to. They have annihilated this tribe of Israel. They went to God and said, should we go up against our brother? But they've still not gotten it fully gripped in their head. This is still my brother. The soldiers engaged in military conflict? Yes, battle is battle. But now they have ravaged cities of those that weren't engaged in battle. We've said it before and we'll say it again. As we read through this section of the book of Judges, we often ask who's doing what's right. And the simple answer is it doesn't look like anybody but God. Why is He letting them do this? Because they and we need to see where we will take society if we just do what's right in our own eyes. Genocide. It started as an act of justice. Then a tribe decided to defend those with whom they identified, and it ends with an act of genocide. At some point, someone's got to stop and say, wait, we can't do this. We've got to walk by a higher standard. We've got to be better than this, don't they?